Hi, everybody. It's Heather, and it's Wednesday. And I realize I've been using the word Lent a lot lately. And if you don't have a church background, or even more specifically, if you have a certain kind of United Church background in the more or in some of the more mainline or even Baptist traditions, you may not have a lot of familiarity with what Lent is about. Lent is the 40 days leading up to Easter. That doesn't include Sundays. It starts on Ash Wednesday, and it's a time of year where we spend some time as we're working towards the story, telling the story again of Jesus' death and how it was that he came to be a victim of the oppressive structures of the world. Although I'll give you a spoiler, God wasn't willing to stand for that. There was a different ending in the end. At least in our corner of the United Church, what we've decided to do with the time of Lent is to think through some of the darker sides of faith, some of the more difficult emotions. It used to be when I was a kid that we'd talk about how we were sinful creatures, but I've stepped back from that because I think we already live in a culture that tells us all the ways we don't measure up, and we don't need to hear that from our church most of the time, too. When most of us are just living our lives, when we're going day to day, and doing the best that we can. What we need to hear is that we're beloved. But I think we also need to hear that the world and even ourselves are not everything we wish they were. We don't do as many good things as we want to do. We sometimes don't understand why we find ourselves doing things we vowed we won't, but we still find ourselves doing them. And this time of year, still pretty wintry. Spring hasn't arrived yet. Some of us are feeling down a little bit already. And I think that sometimes the best thing you can do with those down emotions is to work on them, to fully experience them in a safe way. We don't want to drive people down further. And I don't want to tell people who are already suffering from things like clinical depression and stuff like that you should go deeper. That's the sort of thing you should find a good therapist or a counselor or a friend and do in a safe place with somebody who's there to help you through. But for those of us who don't spend very much time thinking about those things, sometimes I think it's important to do that. And this week, as part of our Lenten practices at St. Luke's, one of the issues that we've been looking into is racism. Because racism is one of those things that's embedded in our culture and sometimes makes us do things that we wouldn't have chosen to do. We don't even sometimes realize we're doing them. And when somebody like the author of our book, this is the book we're studying, I have it right here, The Skin We're In by Desmond Cole. You can study it at home even if you're not part of our study. When someone from one of our BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities comes and says, you folks are doing this, our standard reaction is to deny. That's not me, I'm not like that. But what I think a Lenten approach to this thing does is invites us and stuff to go into it. And hopefully we'll have a chance to do that a little bit later on tonight. But I think the thing is that instead of deny, what's right behind that for so many of us is something called grief. And grief is an emotion that we have very little help in our culture telling us what to do with. It's often associated with if you've lost a loved one and then you grieve them. And we sometimes talk about that. But I sometimes think we don't talk about the other aspects of grief. Grief is not just an emotion you feel when you lose someone. Sometimes it's an emotion that you feel when you've lost something. And as I have been doing my own interior work around the Black Lives Matter issue and grappling with my own white privilege and my own white fragility, one of the things I think I've discovered just behind the denial is an incredible grief because I thought I was better than that. And I thought my country was better than that. And I thought my church was better than that. And in order to get to a better place, I feel like I have to go plowing through this mountain of grief that the world is not what I hoped it was. I sometimes think that people faced with that mountain of grief go straight back to denial. It's not that big a deal. We're not as bad as some other people. We're doing our best. We're taking these steps. But I think if you don't deal with the grief, if you don't do the grief work, as some people say in my end of the business, um, you can't get by it. Because what grief is about is it's about letting go of the thing that you used to have or the thing you thought you had. I think in this case, what we're talking about is peace of mind, a certain peace of mind and sureness of the goodness of our own intentions. You let that go because it is something that you can't have back. It's like Pandora's box. Once you open the box, everything rushes out and you can't put it back the way that it was. But if you do work through the grief, what you find on the other side of it is a feeling of now that I have let that go, I can start to figure out what the new normal is. Now that I know I'm not everything I wish I was, I can start working on the state of my own soul. Now that I've discovered that my country is not everything that I thought it was, it's time to start planning what action I can do. Um, and working through the grief is a prerequisite for that. In fact, the process of working through the grief might be what leads you to the steps that you need to take next, but you can't get there if you're not willing to deal with that. Um, I sometimes worry that these sorts of topics are depressing things, and it's not my intention. What I have discovered is every time I do my grief work and actually deal with what is going on inside me, actually deal with the bad feeling, actually have the tough conversation, my whole mood is lifted so much, it's like a gift. And so if there's any grief work that you're sitting there having some trouble starting, afraid that maybe the outcome might not be so good. Let me tell you as well, along with those feelings, the possibility that doing that work will be a gift to you, a gift that will blossom after the work the same way as new life blossomed when Jesus was raised after that awful Good Friday day. A few Lenten thoughts on a sunny afternoon. I hope that wherever you are, that you are feeling supported and able to continue doing whatever it is that your day and your week is demanding of you. I love you all. We'll talk to you soon.